Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. The case we're going to talk about today is the murder of the singer Walter Scott. Walter Scott was born Walter Notice in St. Louis, Missouri, and he was the lead singer of the 60s band Bob Cuban and the Inmen. Walter was a very talented singer, and it had been said that he could be performing in Las Vegas. The band was well known for their song The Cheater, and had ultimately risen to number 12 on the Billboard charts. But unfortunately, like many other artists, they were a one-hit wonder. Walter toured almost non-stop with different bands throughout the 70s and the 80s, but he never had the same success that he had with The Cheater. Because he had spent the majority of his time on the road for so many years, he had an increasingly strained relationship with his wife. Walter was married to Doris, who he met in 1959, and married 4 years later. And together they had twins. While on tour, Walter was having an affair with someone named Joanne, who was another performer with one of the other acts he toured with while on the road. He eventually divorced Doris and ended up marrying Joanne, much to the dismay of his family. Walter's family always had something in the back of their mind against Joanne. They felt like they really couldn't trust her. Because of his busy tour schedule, Walter was on the road so often and was barely at home. He then began another affair with one of his backup dancers named Suzanne. While all of this was happening on tour, Joanne was actually having an affair of her own. She began seeing a man named Jim Williams, who was an electrician who was doing some work at their home. And get this, Jim was having an affair as well. Jim was married to a woman named Sharon, and they had been married for more than 20 years. They had children together, and things seemed to be going well for them. Okay, let's take a minute. You just got here, and I've said a lot of names, so I have prepared an affair chart. Okay, so we have Walter and his wife, Doris. Then Walter began his affair with Joanne. Walter was also seeing Suzanne. And then we have Jim and his wife Sharon, and of course we have Joanne having an affair with Jim. Messy. Unfortunately, tragedy struck on October 19th, 1983, a very rainy night. Jim Williams' wife Sharon had driven off the road and slid down the embankment. Police had found her Cadillac Seville in a ditch, where she was unconscious and wedged under the passenger side dashboard. When the police and ambulance arrived, there was a fire next to the car, and Sharon was alive, but just barely. Upon examination, Sharon had sustained a major head injury, but as police inspected the car, they found very little damage. Something odd police discovered at the scene was a strong whiff of gasoline coming from Sharon's body. The car was later engulfed in flames, so you can imagine that there would have been a gasoline smell, but why was it on her? They also found that the driver's seat had been pushed back. This would likely point to someone much taller than her being in the driver's seat. She was taken to the hospital, and the nurses recall the extremely prominent smell of gasoline. While at the hospital, they did all they could to save Sharon, but unfortunately, 13 hours later, doctors told Jim that Sharon's brain was irreparably damaged, to which he gave his permission to take her off life support. Back in 1983, St. Charles County did not have a forensic pathologist, and her death was signed off at the hospital as a car crash. People in town felt really sorry for Jim. He was well liked and did a lot of pro bono electrical work in the community. This was just a very hard time for everybody. Then, 2 months later, on December 27th, Walter was reported missing to police by Joanne. She told him that he had left to get a new battery for his car, but had just never come back. The man who had owned the garage where Walter was supposed to have gone said that Walter never came in that night and that he hadn't seen him. At this point, Walter's dad was really not all that concerned. He said, remember all those times he had gone off for a few days with no notice? He'll be back. Walter's mom was very worried, but his dad continued to reassure her. A day after Walter was reported missing, His car was found abandoned in the St. Louis airport. This is not part of the story, but I have flown in and out of this airport many times. Okay, so maybe he did run off with someone. We all know he was having affairs. But when police checked the departing flight's manifests, Walter was not listed on any of them. The next day, Walter's parents went to Walter and Joanne's house and saw Jim Williams sitting at the kitchen table going through Walter's jewelry and guns. Walter's dad noticed that one of his guns, a .22 caliber, was missing. Literally, what is Jim doing there? Electrical work. Neighbors told police that Jim's car was actually parked outside all night. Joanne was like, no, 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 it's not what you think. Jim slept on the couch, don't you worry. Again, Joanne actually called Walter's manager and told him to cancel all of Walter's upcoming tour dates for the next 9 weeks, and his mom was like, no, what are you doing? He's only been gone for 24 hours. You can't just cancel all his shows. Walter's gonna come back and be like, why are all my shows canceled? That's odd. 2 days after Joanne had canceled Walter's upcoming shows, she and Jim drove to Pennsylvania to check the tour bus for Walter's personal things or anything he might have left behind. I don't know about you, but very little time has passed. Like just a few days. And everyone is insisting that everything is okay and that Walter just ran off for a few days, but he'll be back. So why is Joanne clearing out his tour bus and canceling his upcoming shows? It's almost like she knows he's not coming back. Over 6 months went by, and none of his friends, family, or bandmates had heard anything from him, and unfortunately, the case went cold. A few months later, and desperate for any answers, Walter's mom went to a psychic, and he told her that Walter was in cold, cold water. It's not moving water, and there's something red on top. He's not far from home. Okay, hello, specific. I don't know how much stock you want to put into this, but for Walter's mother, Kay, this was a lead. After hearing this, she all of a sudden had an idea of where Walter could be. She remembered that Jim Williams' house had a red door. Evidently, this was enough for police to search Jim's house, which, why wasn't this done in the first place? He's clearly a person of interest, and this is the first time his house is being searched. Okay, better late than never. So the police searched Jim's house and the surrounding property, and this ends up turning up nothing. Did I have you going there? Sorry. 9 months after Walter's disappearance, Joanne had filed for divorce, citing abandonment and adultery. Okay, Joanne, you're one to talk. And guess what happened next? Joanne married Jim. So during this time, across town, there was an overhaul happening in the medical examiner's office. The new medical examiner, Dr. Mary Case, was asked to look in some of the older suspicious death cases. And guess whose case she looked at? Remember Jim's ex-wife Sharon? It was her car accident case. Remember how the police had examined the car and noted that it was a small front-end collision and that the car had sustained very minimal damage, but Sharon had suffered blunt force trauma to her head? The medical examiner had wondered why this was never explained. Mary Case had written in her report that a mild frontal collision isn't consistent with massive head injuries to the back of the head. She told the sheriff that they needed to exhume Sharon Williams. She had written to the state's attorney office in Williamson County, Illinois, asking him to take her request to a judge. 5 months had passed and nothing happened. Dr. Case had ended up contacting Sharon's mother, who said that she had always had doubts about her daughter's death, and she gave permission for her daughter to be exhumed. Upon examination, Dr. Case had found that Sharon had sustained 2 powerful blows to the back of her head. She had also found 2 points of impact on Sharon's skull that produced lacerations, and Sharon's skull actually ended up being fractured in these 2 places. Dr. Case had determined that the weapon had been a long, very heavy, blunt object, perhaps something like a pipe or bar. Her death was then declared a homicide. The police report indicated that upon the crash, Sharon's driver's side door was left wide open. Her seat had been pushed all the way back, as far as it would even go, even though she was not particularly tall. And when she was admitted to the hospital, the nurses remember there being the extremely prominent smell of gasoline. Remember the grass fire that was next to the car? The brake lines did not appear to be tampered with, so what could have caused the fire? Maybe it was deliberately set, possibly with the help of an accelerant, perhaps. The investigation into Sharon's death made police take a closer look at Jim. They felt that the deaths of Walter and Sharon must somehow be connected, and Jim was their lead suspect. At this point, Walter had been missing for over 3 years, and the police were desperate for leads. They then came across Jim's son, Jim Jr., in a Florida prison. He was serving time and thought that cooperating with the police would lead to a potentially reduced sentence. He was pretty much mocking them, saying like, wow, you guys really haven't figured it out yet? How stupid can you be? First of all, Jim Jr., do you want a reduced sentence or not? Jim Jr. said, where do you think he could hide a body? It was winter. The lakes and rivers are frozen. Where do you think he would hide a body? He told police that his father had a cistern in his backyard that he had covered with concrete and had built a flower bed on top. So, police returned to Jim's house and found the cistern in the backyard, just where Jim Jr. said it was. They removed the flower bed and noticed that there was water in it, and floating in the water was what looked like a body. They removed the body to find that it was wearing the same type of tracksuit that Joanne had reported Walter was wearing when he had gone missing all those years earlier. They had drained the rest of the water out of the cistern and found a sealed plastic baggie that had Walter's credit cards and driver's license in it. An autopsy had determined that Walter was killed by a single gunshot wound to the back. He was found hogtied as well as tied at his wrists and ankles with a rope that investigators also assumed was attached to cement blocks that were found in the cistern as well. Believe it or not, Jim denied having anything to do with Walter's death. Like he was literally found on your property, feet away from his house, and he was like, nope, didn't do it, wasn't me. He said, if I was going to shoot somebody, I would do it between the eyes. Okay, Jim, tell us how you didn't do it. Walter's parents think that he was killed at home since he was fully clothed and wearing socks but not shoes when he was discovered in the cistern. After he was recovered, Walter's parents decided to intern him in a mausoleum. They wanted to keep him above ground since he had spent 3 years underwater. Joanne and Jim were arrested for Walter's murder, and Jim was also charged with the murder of his wife Sharon. Like, finally, some justice for Sharon. During the trial, prosecutors believe that Jim and Sharon got into a fight, and Jim had hit Sharon on the back of the head, fracturing her skull. He then staged the car accident and set the fire by the car, leaving it for police to find. They had a harder time proving his involvement in Walter's murder since the gun used to kill Walter was never found, and they didn't find any rope that matched the rope used to tie up Walter anywhere on Jim's property. However, Jim's neighbors recall in winter during a snowstorm, Jim was seen building a flower bed just a few weeks after Walter went missing. Like, if it's anything less than 50 degrees, I am inside. Why are you pouring concrete during a snowstorm? It's almost as if you don't want people to see what you're doing. And how did that work out for you? Jim Williams was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Which, like, yay! But get ready to be annoyed because Joanne's case never made it to trial. A deal was made with prosecutors that in exchange for a guilty plea for hindering the prosecution, they would drop the murder charge. Joanne was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but only ended up serving 18 months and had to pay a $5,000 fine. Ugh. Jim Williams died in prison on September 11th, 2011, at the age of 72. Joanne died on May 12th, 2019, at the age of 75. As you can imagine, this whole thing has been a horrible ordeal on Walter's family because it was so high profile. They really didn't get a break. In 2003, Walter Sr. had passed away. When Walter's mother Kay was 90 and recently recovering from an illness, her other son Ron had hired a woman that was living next door to help Kay out and take care of her. Her name was Linda Marshall. Linda Marshall had been helping Kay for 7 months. She was preparing her meals and helping her out around the house and just looking after her in general. Over time, Kay had noticed that her spending money was going quicker than usual, and she had had Ron check the family hiding place. Ron told police that one day Linda had said that she needed money, and Ron told her not to worry about it. He said, "I went in there and everything was gone. Money, everything was gone." Then someone suggested, "Have you looked in the safe?" And Ron thought, "Oh no." The safe was unfortunately left open, and when Ron looked inside, the jewelry boxes were all there, but many of them were empty. Linda had taken several items, including gifts from Kay's late husband Walter, that obviously hold just such sentimental value. Many of the things taken were family heirlooms, such as Kay's mother's engagement ring, which was a white sapphire that was over 100 years old. Through a recorded phone conversation, Linda did admit that she had stolen hundreds of dollars from Kay. She also told Ron where he could find one of the rings she had taken from the safe. Luckily, Kay was able to get her favorite cocktail ring back, and she still had her wedding ring. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to retrieve the rest of her stolen jewelry, which she was heartbroken over, obviously. She had said, "You just don't think of people walking into your house and doing that," but she did. As if the highly publicized murder of her son wasn't enough, now the family was back in the news for this. Kay passed away earlier this year on June 27th, 2002, at the age of 98. Linda Marshall was charged with stealing over $500, and prior to this conviction, it was revealed that she had a history of writing bad checks. If you're ever in the position where you're needing a caregiver or you're needing to hire someone else a caregiver, please, 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 please do a background check. It's worth it, I promise. Trust your instincts about people. If your friends and family tell you something is off about someone, listen. Respectfully take what they have to say into consideration, and be careful out there. Well, that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.